Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And for the new faces in the room and those who are listening, you might be asking yourself, what is the Stoa? Some call it a digital campfire, a communal podcast. We have a wisdom gym here. It's basically where all the cool kids come to sensefully sense make together during this meta crisis. And today we have Nora Bateson. And Nora is going to be our sense maker in residence for the month of November. And this is a series we have at the Stoa. It's a 4-part series over a month where someone comes in to make sense of the world, an aspect of the world together. And this series has an MC usually, and our MC is Rachel Bisker, who's waving right now with that kind of really giddy essence, which is an inside joke. Maybe we'll unpack later. And she's living currently in the mountains of North Carolina. She's a Stoa super user, and she works with troubled teens with wilderness therapy. So I'm going to tag in Rachel in a moment. She will introduce Nora, the series, and the protocols for today. So that being said, Rachel, I'll take you in. You're on mute.
Awesome. Thank you. We are here today with Nora Bateson. Among many things, Nora is an award-winning filmmaker. She is an author, an educator, and the president of the Bateson Institute. So Nora, thank you for being here. We're really excited to have you. Before I hand it over to you, I just want to go over some things about the format real quick. This is being recorded to be posted to YouTube. So we'll just ask that everybody please keep yourselves muted. We're going to have a Q&A after Nora speaks with us. So please be dropping your questions for Nora in the chat box. If you'd like, I'm happy to read it for you. Just indicate that in the chat, or I'll call on you to unmute yourself. So all that being said, Nora, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Peter. And thanks all you brave souls who have tuned in today. When Peter and I first started talking about doing this Sense Maker in Residence series, I was trying to, sort of think about what would be something different to offer. There's a lot of overlap out there in the sort of sense making complexity, how are we going to change the world sort of space. And I think that I reached an interesting and kind of, I guess, personally historic kind of moment where I felt like there is some material that I work with quite frequently, and that I get frustrated with not finding in the world of that we're working with. And so I thought, well, why is it that I don't bring this out? Why is it that this is somehow behind closed doors? How is it that I am using this? Where did I get it from? What is it? And how can I share that with all of you in 4 sessions, each of which is only an hour, okay? So what I really need is 52 years to actually go through it with you, but we've got 4 sessions, each of which is an hour. And that 52 years number, that's the story of my whole life. And what that doesn't include is the lifetimes that came before mine. Much of the work that we're going to be playing around with is actually coming from my father and from his father, and before that, from thousands of years of indigenous culture. I have this issue in my own life, which is that because I was a child when I learned about all this. I didn't learn about it as systems theory, as complexity. I just learned about life. So that the way that breakfast happened included the relationships and the language and the perception within breakfast being complex, our conversation being complex, our perception of breakfast being just complex, because that's what life is. So I think that for me, one of the things that I really wanted to do is to just take a couple of my dad's sort of named theories over the next few days, the next few sessions, and to play with them with you, and hopefully bring them out of the realm of language into the realm of some kind of embodied understanding, so that after 4 sessions, maybe you will be in a room and think, there's something wrong with the way we're approaching this. What is it? There's something missing here. And you'll have something to draw from in that moment. So that's my goal. And mostly also just to experiment with you and see where this goes, because one of the things I'm very interested in is the way in which theory is described. Okay, so we're talking about resident sense making. And as a resident of my own sense making, where is the relationship between my understanding of theory as an abstraction, my perception of how that theory is in the world, and my capacity to be in relationship with it? Okay, so I could identify a communication theory, here's a name for it, and then I could see it in my family. But when it's going on at my dinner table, how do I respond to it? Okay, so those are different levels. And that's where I want to play with you. Okay, because it's easy enough to make a map of a complex system. And it's another thing altogether to live in one. And another thing altogether more to think about, what can I bring into this complex system? My body, my family, my society, my community, the forest. What can I bring in that allows for some kind of shift? So that's what I want to play with. So the work that I have been doing, and there's several of you in this session right now that are familiar with this already, is something that I called warm data. And warm data has to do with information. What information? What information are we perceiving? What information is actually entering our senses? What information are we responding with and to? So I think this is a good place to start. Okay. So the place that I want to begin, and for those of you who have been in the warm data courses with me, you're going to find this slide familiar. Can I share screen?
Yes, so
Okay.
would you like to share?
There we go. Here we go. I'm going to share screen real quick. This is the one I want. All right. So I'm going to make this bigger, but I'm not going to make it take over the whole screen, because then I get lost. So I want to start with this quote, because what warm data does is it addresses the transcontextual. And transcontextual is a word I got from my dad. He says, let me coin the word transcontextual as a general term for this genus of syndromes. It seems that both those whose life is enriched by transcontextual gifts and those who are impoverished by transcontextual confusions are alike in one respect. For them, there is always or often a double take. A falling leaf, the greeting of a friend, or a primrose by the river's brim is not just that and nothing more. Okay, it's not just that and nothing more. Exogenous experience may be framed in the context of dream. An internal thought may be projected into the context of the external world, and so on. For all this, we seek a partial explanation in learning and experience. I know that for those of you who've seen this slide before, it's okay to see it again, because I could read this another 300 times and still get something out of it. The big piece here is this piece that it's not just that and nothing more. All right, so we'd like to talk about the education system, or we'd like to talk about the food system, or we'd like to talk about family therapy and psychological diagnostic systems. We'd like to talk about the economic systems, or we'd like to talk about biological systems. It's not just that and nothing more. And this is where we get into trouble, is that there is this liminal space, this thing that's happening that is neither here nor there, this thing where he says a falling leaf, the greeting of a friend, or a primrose by the river's brim is not just that and nothing more. A falling leaf. A falling leaf. What's a falling leaf when it's not just that and nothing more? Is it a sign that autumn is coming? Is it something melancholy? Is it a fugue? A piece of music? Is it an explanation of gravity? Is it a message? Is it something to say that the soil isn't strong enough, that the tree is lacking nutrients? Is it just to tell you that the wind is blowing? Is there a bird in the tree? It's not just that and nothing more. And the greeting of a friend? The greeting of a friend could just be on the script. It could be, hey, how you doing? But if every other day that friend has greeted you, they've come to you and wrapped their arms around you, then when they just wave and say, hey, how you doing? That's not just that and nothing more. If that greeting of a friend is the first greeting they've given you in years, it's not just that and nothing more. So the information that's coming in is not just that information. It's the contexts it's dropping into. So this is pulling us into another kind of perception. Another kind of perception. I started off with this. This is ridiculously small print, you guys. It's not for you to read, it's for me to read it to you. But here you go, teeny tiny. So we called this thing the hallway of hallways, kind of coming off of this little poem that I posted a while ago about trying to fix the wrong context of broken is a hallway of hallways. The suffering is the consequence, not the problem. Don't solve it. It's not that the schools are not good enough, it's that the next generation is being squeezed into the past. It's not that poverty is devastating, it's that the economy devastates. It's not that our bodies have been violated, it's that predators are celebrated. It's not that tech is evil, it's that it's unable to feel. It's not that the doctor is wrong, it's that the poison is in the food. It is that the poison in the food, water, air, and stress are beyond the reach of medication. It's not that politicians don't make change, it's that they're bound to keep things as they are. It's not that the journalism is crap, it's that it's selling one side of a 1,000-sided story. It's not that the climate has problems, it's that identity is mixed up in material wealth. It's not that there are dangers out there, it's that people need each other and are taught to hold back. No committee or action team can actually reach the conditions that produce the issues, but they can produce metrics on solving the consequences. It's not that there's no wish to meet the deeper needs. It's that healing cannot be divided or measured by department. The confusion is compounding. Going down a path that starts with an inadequate task is the beginning of an assembly line of industrial-sized, overlapping systemic problems. So this is where I wanted to start. What's happening? How do we get into this other realm of perception so that when we begin to look at what's going on around us, there isn't a lostness, that we don't take it at the wrong level? So I wanted to have a little experiment around playing with transcontextual perception. Here's our little experiment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of written music. And then we're going to go deeper into the perception and start to think about how these layers come together. Okay, so a long time ago, there was a guy, and some of you are familiar with this guy, and his name was Alfred Korzynski. And Alfred Korzynski had a famous saying. He said, "The map is not the territory. The map is not the territory." And this is something to really ruminate on. Today, this is what we're playing with. The map is not the territory. The name is not the thing named. I mean, you know, when you're on the ground and you have a map in your hand, that you have to pay attention to the details that are there. It doesn't say on the map if it's raining or if you've been there before, or if that rock that you see to your right is the rock where your lover proposed to you. Right? That's not on the map. That's in the territory. But your experience of that place is very much tangled up in the territory. The map can't show that. Maps are useful. Maps are beautiful. Maps are fantastic. But maps are not the territory, right? The name is not the thing named. You can name something, tree or ground or soil or pig. And in the naming, you can name it, but that is not the pig or the soil or the tree. That's not, you have a name, but you are not your name. Other people have your name, maybe. The name is not the thing named. The name is an abstraction. The menu is not the meal. You go to a restaurant, they show you the menu. Even when you go to one that has pictures of everything you're going to order, you know that the menu is not the meal. You know that. But still, we mix this up. So I want to have a little exploration into how these forms of abstraction come into relationship with us, okay? And what I would like to do is to actually do it through music today. And to invite you into this weird world that I live in, okay? Because in my weird world, I love the theory. The theory is good, and I appreciate the rigor of theory. And one of my favorite things to do is to help bring it into life and to show you or to express a story or an experience in which that theory is there. One of the things that happens though is that when you are able to really perceive the complexity theory in life, it's a lot like the difference between being able to look at a sheet of music and being able to listen to that music. The sheet music doesn't have the resonance in it that the music does. It's still the music, but it's not the music. Okay, so I wanted to start with Rachel, if you could play the first Bach piece, just the audio. So we're just going to have a little exploration here, okay? So this is Bach cello number 1 in suite number 1 in G. So just take a moment and notice in your sense-making self where the sense-making is. Where is that music? What does it resonate? What does it connotate? Where does it live? Is it attractive? Is it evocative? Is it repulsive? Does it invite you in? Does it shut you out? Where is it? And from another direction, we can look at, I think it's this one. There it is. Okay, so that's what you just were listening to. Some of you can read music and you may be able to read that and hear those notes in your head. Probably a lot of you can't. But still, it's a different description of the music. It's another description, another kind of abstraction of it. I'm gonna close this and could you play the YouTube of the person playing it? And let's just do it for about a minute, not longer, okay? Just to get a sense of it. Okay. All right, so that was another dimension, right? How did that perception resonate differently? Watching the woman play, looking at the instrument, the connotations and the meta messages around what concert cello performance is all about. What is the culture of that? What are the expectations in that? From her black dress to the lighting to the shaping of the video shot. Okay, there's different sense making there. And now could you, Rachel, play the one that's got the music, the script that's moving with the score? All right, so we're building some frames of perception. Where is the music? Where is the music? Is it in the instrument? Is it in you? When you make sense of that music, where are you making sense of it? Okay, now we're going to shift to another piece of music. And what I'd like for you to do is Well, I'm not going to tell you. You just listen. You just listen. Let your own senses find their way. You know what I'm talking about, right, Rachel? The audio version of the second piece. Okay. All right. So where's this? How are you making sense of that? Where is that sense making taking place? And how are the two pieces of music starting to relate to each other? If we look, okay, at the sheet music, here's the sheet music for a change is going to come. Such an incredible thing is the language of musical scripting, huh? Incredible that we've found a way to write it down. It's fantastic. It makes sense, though, in a very different way, obviously, than the music does. And that piece of music, I think, in particular, is also resonating in the context of history and really, I think, of the present as well. And Rachel, for the last piece, can you put on the you know the one? Well, it's the only one left, right? Yeah, you've been great. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're doing this for me. Okay. So we are stacking some things. We're looking into these various levels. And if first of all, I love that we're doing this with music today. This is where I wanted to be, because there's something necessarily indescribable about what we're talking about. It needs to be thus. So how to give that indescribable process the rigor and attention and validity necessary to do the work that needs to be done, without naming it, without boxing it, without defining it such that it becomes too small again. Okay, it's not up to me in any way to describe your experience of either of those pieces of music, or to describe the experience of how you right now are imagining them in relationship to each other, or where they live in your body. Okay, as a matter of integrity, it's really important that I leave that space open. But I am asking you, creating the conditions here for you to start to look at how all these different ways of seeing, perceiving, hearing, sharing in a Zoom call across the world of all things, this piece of music in this moment on this day together. Not what are the different categories, but what is the relationship between them? That's the piece where we get lost. That's the sticky pit. But it's also where all the juicy life is, right? It's in the relational piece between the notes, between the images, between the context, between the way in which we can intellectualize what's happening in that music and see the language of it in abstraction, but also where it lives in us and how we are in relationship. Yeah. Okay, so that's where I want to start, because that's what we are really paying attention to when we're thinking about warm data. Where is the music? Where is it? It's in the technology, it's in the instruments, it's in the culture, it's in the intellect, it's in the imagination, it's in the heart, it's in the body, it's in you, it's in me, it's in us, it's in something that we can't quite grasp. And what I really would like to bring to this is to remember in that hallway of hallways piece, the mix-ups that we're getting into, okay? If you want to change or enter into the cello, Suite Number 1 in G by Bach, if you change the notes on the sheet, that's one thing. If you change the way the cello is shaped, that's one thing. If you change the person who's playing or the place that they're playing or the moment they're playing in, or the people that you're listening with, how do you hear the music? Okay, so this for me is one of the most important aspects of complexity, if you want to call it that. Life, it's also called systemic process, you could name it. But for today, what I would like for you to do is just let it sit with you. Thinking about whatever work it is that you're doing and the ways in which you might use some of what we're playing with in description and perception here. How would you then begin to describe and perceive your family if your family were a piece of music? How would you play that piece of music? How would you play it today? How would you have played it when you were 16? How would you play it for a friend? How would you play it for someone from whom you wanted to keep secrets? Where are the secrets? So I'm going to open up to questions now, but I hope that I've sufficiently stirred the pot. We have a lot of people in the room. So maybe the best way to do questions or this would be to actually break into groups, do breakout groups for about, I don't know, we don't have much time left, do we, Peter? Do we end at the top of the hour?
We scheduled for 75 minutes, but we can end at the top of the hour.
Okay, good. If we have 75 minutes, then we're fine. Then why don't we take like 7 to 10, let's take 7 minutes and do breakout rooms of maybe 3, if that's possible, and a little discussion, and then come back together to sort of think about what kind of questions we want to bring forward from that into the next process, okay? Good.
All right, just give me a moment. I'll put everyone in breakout rooms.
Okay.
And I'll leave you out, Nora? Or do you want to be in a breakout room? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll stay here with you.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Rachel's Wi-Fi just, her power went out apparently. So I'll take over MC duties. Nora, how would you like to proceed from here? Just field some questions.
I would like to open it up to some questions, and then when we need to kind of wind it into the end of the session, I'll do that, okay? But let's take some questions and thoughts and see what you're thinking.
Cool. So if you have any questions, just throw it in the chats right now. I'll call on you, or Rachel will call on you. I think she's back, and then you can unmute yourself. So Dave Swedlow, are you still in the room?
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I was, with the US election results unfolding, one of the things I say is that the current contexts of that unfold, and it's really tempting to collapse them into a single map of meaning to some what are we saying? And yet it seems now more than ever, the violence of such a collapse is evident, and the longing to keep the space open is full of aching. And the question is kind of, how can we hold the grieving openly and allow the feels to run through us without protecting too heavily the desire to like there's something in that. And in our little discussion group, we were saying I was noticing the same thing, that the tension that builds wants resolution. And sometimes it feels like the meaning of it's like, oh, it's so close. Like the meaning is here. We can just grab hold of it. It's like, no, don't do that thing. And so it's this moment, it feels so consequential, and the grieving feels so heavy, and yet it feels like there's something that gets released in that grieving. So I'm curious about how do we avoid the crushingness of safety.
Yeah, safety is the key word. And of course, I think maybe the least safe position right now is the position of safety. So there's a real set of paradoxes and inconsistencies around safety. I think it would be interesting to talk about that more deeply in the next time. But I do want to say that one of the theories that we're going to be playing with in these 4 sessions is the theory of the double bind. And I think what you are expressing taps into that. And it's the experience of being in a binary situation that neither direction is anything but disastrous, and the inability to actually speak into some other space. So I think that when that happens, what is most needed is context, adding more context, which is kind of what the warm data lab does. We're not doing any warm data labs in this because we haven't got the extra minutes to do it. But I guess another piece of what you're addressing has to do with anxiety. And the anxiety to have that safety is prohibitive of the deep dwelling in this relational process where the change actually is, which is kind of why I really wanted to bring this up, is that it's altogether tempting, seductive, urgent, impossible not to get kind of channeled down the cultural scriptings of our anxiety that then produces more polarity. And in that poem, The Hallway of Hallways, each one of those things is addressing, is addressing the crisis, right? The suffering is the consequence, not the problem, but we want to address the suffering. Okay, the schools are not good enough, but then we start to change the education system. But the issue is that the next generation's being squeezed into the past. So there's this continual mixing up of some of what we were playing with here today, which is these levels of abstraction. What we have been doing, by the way, is a kind of Batesonian version of Bertrand Russell's logical typing. That's what we're playing with today, is being careful about which level you are talking about, okay? If you look at the script music and you say, oh, I love that song, and you show it to someone, they're not going to feel it, probably, right? And so much of what we're doing is in that, getting caught in the language of complexity, which is not the complexity. The map of complexity is not the complexity. So how do we do the drop into the experience, into the within, instead of being in the about, into the within of that complexity? And I think that's what you're getting at, David. And that was a really long answer, but anyway, maybe it addressed some other stuff. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nora. So my internet's going a little in and out, so thank you for bearing with me, y'all. I think, help me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, Sahil? Sahil?
Yeah, hey. Yeah,
Hi.
it's Sahil. Hey, hi again, Nora.
Hi.
So my question is about like the power of warm data. And so I'm just going to read it out from the chat. So I get increasingly jaded about rhetoric as trust evaporates and I see moving messages coupled with arbitrary messages. So I try to deny warm data. I don't really yet know what your distinction is between warm and cold, but cold data is comfortable. It's at a distance. It's got no hold over me. It's not trying to tell me what to feel. It's still hijackable, but not as hijackable. So is there a warm data approach to keeping warm data sustainable?
It's funny, because I think oh boy, that's a really interesting question, because it's about the context, right? So it's about the meta, whether the meta message is in the cold data or the warm data, right? So I don't think that you can say that the cold data isn't manipulating you, because it depends on the meta that it's taking place in. And probably the same is true for whatever it is that we're talking about when we're talking about warm data. So that when you are reading a statistic sheet about something, those numbers, they're not trying to manipulate you, are they? Who made that sheet? What are all of the warm data messagings around how that becomes important and why? Right, so I would sort of suggest that it's almost impossible to get information loose of its warm data. Okay, so even when we make mistakes, we're making those mistakes because of the other information we're living in. Okay, so the information is not the information. And that's where we get, it's not just that and nothing more. That measured statistic is not just that and nothing more. It's a message, first of all, that says that the measurement is valuable. It's a message, second of all, that says that by reducing whatever it is that has been measured to its measuringness, right? Because you have to take things out of context to measure them. That somehow that process was more important than the context. So inside the numbers, there's a lot of warm data already swimming around in the cultural and sense. We're here to talk about sense making, but what is it that's already in the epistemological or in your observational process that says this is nice and clean and I can just be with this. Whereas this other thing, this music thing, this is messy. And I would actually say that you could reverse that. And you could say, the music thing is nice and clean because it is going to feel different tomorrow. And it doesn't pretend to be the same information tomorrow as it was today. But the numbers, now they're tricky. So because the world is changing, but the numbers stayed the same. My relationship to the numbers changed, but the numbers didn't change. So I think I love your question, and I think it's really relevant because I think this is one of the reasons that, first of all, there has been a kind of knee-jerk response to only having cold data. By the way, I have nothing against cold data, only that we need both, right? So I'm not against pulling things out of context. I'm just all for putting them back in again. And you can look at the notes on the page. It's really important to look at the notes on the page and to measure the stanzas, right? It's also really important to have a relationship with the music and to be able to dance with someone and feel the healing of that, right? So I don't want to separate those two. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Did you have a question? Awesome.
Yes. I'm trying to express my question in a better way, because I have tried to ask in a very simple, labeled way by just wondering, Nora, how could you describe, or could you list the senses that you make senses as your own residence of sense making, perhaps beyond 5 senses? It's just, maybe I can call them, what are your observing senses? That just brings openness, non-avoidance, courage, and the relatedness of everything to everything.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to kind of keep in mind that in the English language and in the culture, culture is so much of this. So much of what it's possible to perceive has to do with what has names, what we can communicate. And the experience of our senses is actually limited by vocabulary, I would say. And so many of the senses that get, when we describe, somehow to describe touch as different than smell, as different than sight, or different than sound, or different, right? And what's not in there is all of the synesthesia, all of the things that are coming together, where so many of you, listening to the music, had a physical response, an emotional response. And can you separate those? Was that something in your ear? Was it something in your memory? Was it something in the culture? Where was that? So I think the issue for me is that in this kind of time, one of the things that everybody's really interested in is how is it possible to change the system we live within and live in another way? Okay, for me, that's what's underlying this question of how are we sense making? I don't think we'd be in this room right now if we weren't actually wondering about that. And that's going to include an idea of who you are in your identity. Right? So part of the way you heard that music had to do with the way those notes are bouncing around on your idea of your identity, of how you are in relationship to your culture, how you are in relationship to the past, to the future, to love, to pain, to angst, right? So where are those senses? And is it a good idea to pull them apart? And if we pull them apart, can we put them back together again? Because maybe that sensation of, people called it the feels, right? Like, what a great thing to get the feels on the sense making program. Where are the feels? And I think, I guess the issue is coming back to that thing that it's produced in multiple contexts simultaneously. Okay, so emotions are transcontextual. You don't get fear without love. You don't get love without curiosity and inquiry and hope and lostness and confusion and gratitude. And right, you can't pull them apart. You can sort of have one up front that's the featured thing of the moment, but it is informed absolutely by a lifetime of other contextual experiences, of lots of emotions. And the same is true, of course, of taste. If you taste salt, are you not also tasting the lack of sugar? If you taste the chili, are you not also tasting the abundance of the texture that's there? And is there a sound of having hot chilies in your mouth? Is there a sound to that? Can you feel a sound in your memory of that sense of getting wasabi up your nose? What does that sound like? So I think this question of what's in the warm data, what's in that liminal space, is about bringing those things back into relationship and noticing that the tending is in the relationship between them, as opposed to that I'm going to pull this apart from that and change it. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions? Hope that was.
It was great. Thank you. I think we have one from Kim, and that'll probably be our last question before I'll hand it off to you, Nora, to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. This is fabulous. This is really simple, and I know this is what you're getting at, but it's sort of like it's a little bit of a mind fuck. When we did the experience, I kept wanting to get meta and more meta and more meta so that I could go, oh, okay, got it. And then recognizing that just my experience of doing that was influencing the way I was seeing and experiencing it. In our small group, Ka said something about just feeling happy. And it just said, well, what if we all had agency in this? This is the question. Where does agency come in? Because if we all just said, well, let's exude happiness, or let's offer something specific, and then that changes the formula. And I know this is what you're getting at, but you said something, is it possible to change the system? So I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about that agency. And I'm already going through it in circles in my mind. So anyway, anything you can offer to that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're hitting balls pretty far down the road on this, so I hope everybody's okay. And I guess what I would like to kind of say to that question that you're asking is, there's a perception that if you have the information that you need, you can make a decision, or you can form an inquiry based on that information, and you can pursue that inquiry and you can find a solution. Okay, so let's just say that that's what's there. All right. Now, if you perceive the system very differently, the question is going to be very different. And the pathways of pursuit of that inquiry are also going to be different. And in that way, we're looking at the questions that are being asked into a system as pathway openers. Okay? Now, I want to pull back from that a little bit and let you have your meta and ask you, what's in the tone of the question? Okay, because actually there's so much relational process happening inside. Okay, if you are inside that piece of music, there is a tonality that's happening there. Just like in a family, just like in a media moment after an election, just like in a forest, there is a tonality. Is it possible that the question, the communication itself, can help the tone shift? How does the question itself? Okay, so we're thinking of communication as something that is moving through systems as a pathways, like, linear roads. This question leads to that, that leads here. But what if you thought of them as spices going into a pot of soup? How does your question change the alchemy, the tonality of what it's possible to say, what it's possible to think, who it's possible to be in that? So for me, what you're talking about as agency, I would think of as attention, as the reason we're here today, as this kind of sense making around how do I join the dance? What are the articulations I can bring that allow there to be a shift in the tone? Because from there, everything changes, right? Something like that. But that was a pretty hard hit that I just gave you. So we can come back to that in the next one and the next one, and we can keep coming, okay, into that, because I think it's an important point, but I didn't mean to get there on the first date. So I guess we're coming to the end of our first session, and I just want to say how much I have really enjoyed doing this with you. And I hope that between now and next Monday, that you get a chance to just explore this business of abstractions and levels. What am I looking at? What's the map and what's the territory? What's the written score and where's the music? Where's the menu? Where's the food? And to start to play with all those relationships that are in there. It's a question of how we participate. And if you're participating with the map, you're going to be at a certain distance from the territory. If you're participating in the territory, it's very difficult for the description to fit on the map. I'm going to leave you with that and just say thank you so much, and I'll see you next Monday.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Nora. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. See you next week.